Hello, welcome to the shed. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you 2 different ways to cross-cut a board correctly. Hope you enjoy. This video is going to be encompassing quite a few of the techniques that we've learnt in this beginner series up until this point, like how to sharpen and use your marking knife correctly, how to square up your square correctly, and also how to put a knife line around a board correctly so you get it to match once it's complete. So I'm going to leave links to all those videos down below, or if you're watching along in the series, you'll find those videos in that playlist. So let me bring you in here and we'll get started with the first way in which you can mark a board and cut it to length. So to do this, we want to be marking a knife line around your board. You could use a pencil, but a knife line is going to get you more accuracy here. So you want to use your reference edge and reference face as I've showed you before, so let's just get started. So we're going to run them around as we've previously discussed in that other video. So you can see here we've got this line running all the way around the board and it all matched up right the way around. So now what we're going to do is, I like to use a bench hook for this, and the best way if we're doing this first technique, which is cutting right up against the knife line, is that we back cut against that so we get a reference. We'll grab a chisel and we're going to push back against that line, and it actually stops when it hits that knife line. So the knife line has created a kind of wall, and we're going to use this to back cut against it. Now, this back cut that you put in, you always want to make sure it's on the waste side, because you don't want this little divot to be on the side you want to keep. We've back cut, now there's sort of this little ridge in here, and we're going to use that to reference the saw in. Now if there's any other little bits, you can come back in and just recut that line a little bit, just to make sure all the little scraps are gone and you've actually back cut it correctly. Now, I like to come in on this corner and do the same thing against that knife line there, just so we have a little reference on this very corner here, which is the 2 angles that we get, so we can match the saw against this edge here as well. So now that we've cut that, we can bring it into the middle or just hang it off the side of your bench hook like we are here. Now, to start, I start on my far side. Now, if you're using the Japanese pull saw, you can actually start on the other end because you're pushing away from you. You can still start at the far edge, but I find on the closer edge works better with these. But since these have hybrid and very small teeth on the Dozuki saw like this, you can kind of just start flat and you don't have to worry. I'm using, obviously, a gent saw here. The way to hold a gent saw correctly is that sits in the back of your palm, your hand comes around, and you still want to keep one finger pointed down like you do with a normal pistol grip. Now that's going to give you accuracy with your sawing, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but pointing the finger where you go strengthens the wrist and actually keeps everything all in alignment. If you don't have that, your wrist can flip-flop. As soon as you put it there, your wrist has more resistance to it and doesn't really move around. So it's a great technique is to keep that finger pointed, whether it's this style or even this style, which feels more natural pointing the finger. You still want to do it with these straight handles. The reason I'm using the gent saw to do this here is that it's a very cheap and inexpensive saw. I'm using the back saw today because whenever I cross cut a board, I try to use a back saw wherever I can because it stiffens the blade and gives you more accuracy in your cutting. So wherever possible, back saw is the way to go, and I'm going to use this one today because it's a nice cheap saw which you can use to cut a lot of your boards to length around this length of board here, which is about 19 millimeters. So anything in that range of 19 to maybe 1 inch in thickness, the depth of the gent saw will do a perfect job. So I'm using the gent saw because they're cheap and inexpensive and easy for everyone to get, and can do your cutting the boards to length and also your dovetails. Now, this saw, if you watched last week's video on the beginner, is actually set as a rip cut saw, and the process of scoring the line here means that we're not going to get tear out on the side we want to keep here, because we've already severed those fibers, so we can get away with using a fine-toothed rip saw, as I mentioned in that beginner handsaw video. To do this, we come to that far side away from me, and so you guys can see this easier, I'm going to hang it off the side just here. So I go to the far side on me and start nibbling away with those teeth. And you notice it started easy because it's such small teeth. I pushed away from me to start it, and it just works well. Now, I want to be referencing right across to this side. So as I'm doing this, I'm not going very deep. I'm staying in that little ridge that we created with that knife. Now, we've got a line initiated here that you can see my knife is running in. So we've initiated that across and gone down just a couple of millimeters, if that. Gone down about a millimeter here. So you can see what I did here is I nibbled it down just so I got in a little bit. We're down about a millimeter, and then I've just slowly dropped my handle down and my hand down to have come right the way across, and we've referenced in this ridge up against that knife line right in here. So we're pushed right up against that ridge, and because we've got that knife line, we're able to get that accuracy. So once we've initiated across here, what I like to do is I come back to this corner here, and I just nibble this corner down a touch. Then I come back in and reference back up in the top, up here, make sure we're in here, and then I'm slowly dropping this back edge here. So I'm going to slowly drop my arm down and nibble in against this part here. So what's actually going on here is we're keeping the saw teeth referenced in this to keep us square across this way on the top of the board. And we're going to follow this line here and stay up against that knife line, or that little wall that was put in here. So it keeps us square in that direction here. And that's why when we're doing this, a lot of people say that they only need 2 lines, because if you've referenced them and got them correct, you should be square on the other sides and you shouldn't need to see them. We're going to keep doing that. Slowly drop, as you can see here. And you want to follow the entire use of the plate. So you want to use the entire length of the plate as we do this. So you're not just sawing in a little spot like that, you want to run right through the whole plate. And as you're coming through, you're just making sure that you're staying right on that line that you had there, right on that knife wall. So now my saw has just come through the bottom here, and I've avoided hitting my bench. You don't want to hit your bench, obviously. Now what we do is, because we've got that referenced here, we can then use that to saw the rest of it, because we're held, and we can just keep working on that angle. I just lift this back up a little bit down on this bottom edge here. So we're going square. And once that was established, we've now used that to cut all the way through. And we've cut through, and we should be relatively square from that. So let's have a look and see how well we did and see how square we got from that. We're relatively square. We're out by, I don't know if you can see that there. It's a little bit hard to see, but it's out by maybe 0.5 millimeter right the way through. Sometimes you can get this dead accurate, sometimes it goes off a little bit. This is fairly accurate. It is out by such a small amount that you probably wouldn't even notice it. Now, in my mind, that's fairly accurate for cutting. I haven't done any cross-cutting against a wall like that for a little bit, so, you know, you go out a little bit. Maybe the line was not 100%, or the kerf is a little bit out, and so you wander just a tiny bit, even though I stayed dead on top of these knife lines that I had on here. So once that happens, you can then put this onto a shooting board. However, the reason I don't 100% like this way of doing it is that Now that we put a shooting board on this, we're no longer going to be dead on that knife line measurement that we wanted. So now I'm going to show you another way that I like to do it. You can still wrap the knife line around, and that is still important. So let me jump back down here, and I'll jump back in with another knife line already around the board. As I've mentioned in the past, when we handsaw, we really want to use a hand plane to make sure that we're nice and square and flat and flush and smooth to mark out our joinery. So if you haven't seen that video where I talked about how to square the end grain using a hand plane, well, I'll leave that link down below for you as well. This is the way that I tend to do it most of the time. And I prefer this style because you don't have to be quite so accurate with your hand sawing. What I do with this second way, I know my knife line is just here, so you can do a little back cut just so you can see where, or you don't have to, but just so you guys can see it, I'm just going to do a little back cut. So this line right here that you can see is the line that we've put in here. So what I'm going, you can come in right on top of it, and then you just want to move it across so you're just off your line. And just like before, we're going to saw through, but we're going to use the finger here as a little bit of a guide, just to stop it moving across onto our line. So we're still using the same technique. We're initiating that line all the way across. Now I can see in doing this that I've already slipped off further down this end, but in this case it doesn't matter as long as we're staying inside our line at this top edge here, which is the most important. You want to stay on the outside of that line. So my purpose here, and what I'm looking for here, is to stay on the outside of that line. All the way around, so it requires you to look a little bit more and just make sure it's staying exactly where you want it to stay. Here we can see that we've still got the shoulder from the knife line there. Along here we've still got that shoulder from that knife line, and you can see that line that I've painted in, and you can see that I've gone a little bit out of square here. But with this process, since we're not on the line, it doesn't matter quite so much. You might waste slightly more material, but now what I'm going to do, you probably guessed, is I'm going to grab the shooting board. Grab your shooting plane, or your plane that's set up for shooting. Now you want to remember what your reference face and your reference edge is, because you're going to ensure that your reference edge is up against the fence, and slowly work it so if we have another look just here, can see that that line is barely visible here. So the whole idea is that you put it in the shooting board like that after you've done it, and now you know that that line that you put there with that knife line is the exact measurement you've got, because you've sawn it to length a little roughly and then used what you know is a perfect referencing and your shooting board to bring that back nice and square. You've got nice smooth grain on here, and it's just perfect and ready to go for your joinery, because you've cut it to length, you know that it's actually at the exact length that you wanted. Whereas if you've cut right on top of that knife line and you saw that there was still a little bit of discrepancy, if I put that board onto the shooting board, well, you then end up with some discrepancies in the length of your board, and you might be out by 0.5 millimeter, 1 millimeter. You really don't want to be out that amount, so I find that the second method works best. So there you go, folks. As you can see, it's not that difficult to actually cut a board to length with accuracy. And while I like the idea of cutting right on top of a knife line, because your saw has a kerf, that kerf can actually cause discrepancies in your cutting, even though you're right up on top of those lines and you stayed on those lines as you saw there that I did. It was still not square once it was finished sawing, and it was still out by about 0.5 millimeter. Now, if we exacerbate that multiple times on every piece, then we're not going to be at the exact size or length of the board that we want. That's why I just feel that it's easier to cut just off that line and use your shooting board to square that board up, and then you know that it's at the dead accuracy of the length that you want and there's no discrepancies whatsoever. So if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing down here. It really does help the channel out more than you know. And if you'd like to support me a little bit further, please consider checking me out on Patreon. That link's down in the description below. And if you'd like to see some more videos like this, please check out the video up here where I teach you how to square up your square correctly to make sure that it is square. And also check out the playlist to begin a series that this video is part of. Bye for now.